button. Doing all the things. And we're live. It is Thursday, March 17th. It is St. Patrick's Day. It is 6:01 p.m. Eastern Time. This is a very odd time for our show. It is a Thursday. It is 6 o'clock. And also we have no guest, but we do have Len Grossman. Wait, am I bringing him back up, Ben? Or
well, I guess you should bring him back up since you just mentioned him. Would be kind of weird to. So
I love Len. Hi, Len. Sorry, I'm gonna unmute you. Sorry. I'm not also gonna unmagic giant screen you. I fat fingered the button. Sorry. Go ahead, Ben.
Happy Purim.
Happy Purim. It is
Happy
Purim. Yeah.
I mean, what a double header when you have Purim. You're supposed to drink so much you don't know your left hand from your right, and then you double it. Then you double with
St. Patrick's Day,
and nobody's getting up tomorrow.
Is today Purim?
It is.
Today is Purim.
Yeah. Oh,
listen to
what was all of the people baking all of the Hamantaschen? Like,
right.
That was in preparation for.
Yes,
and I'm not supposed to have carbs anymore. My wife made double doses of my favorite Hamantaschen. I don't know.
What's your favorite?
Well, I like mun, the poppy seed.
Does that I gotta ask, does that have, I don't know, because I've never had it. Is there something flavor other than poppy seed that's in it?
Yeah, apricot and
cherry. Okay, got it.
Cherry and raspberry.
But poppy seed is kind of like the
Don't these kill you, Ben?
Well, poppy seeds make me a little uncomfortable. Prune is the other.
Is there a prune?
Classic?
Okay.
Yeah. So look, I have to explain why we have Len up here. It relates to this new dog shirt that I have, which arrived in the mail the other day from one John Bordeaux, who had forwarded it from Len. John being protective of my personal identifying information. So it came with a perfectly lovely letter from Len, which explained the history of this dog shirt. And rather than read you the letter, I think I'm just going to have Len tell the story of this fabulous dog shirt and where it comes from. So Len, welcome to the show. And thank you for this the dog shirt and the letter, which was spectacular. Tell the story.
So I didn't bring up the letter again to remember my truth. Sometimes things change. Maybe this is a lie. No, my wife and I were lucky enough to spend a week in paradise, which is San Marcos La Laguna on Lake Atitlan in Guatemala last month. And one of the things Guatemala is known for, and particularly the villages around the lake, are wild dogs. They're not feral, but they're not domesticated. They wander everywhere. They are mostly gentle to people. I've never heard of an incident. They're a little bit annoying on the sidewalks because the sidewalks are very narrow and you can't get around them. But they come up to you and they stare at you until you don't give them something and they walk away, or you give them something. They're in all the restaurants and they're just all over town. And when I saw all these dogs, somehow I thought of Ben. I can't imagine why. And the island is gorgeous. I don't know if I can screen share from Instagram or not.
I think you can. Okay. You can certainly try.
So where is the screen share button?
So if you hover your mouse over the pane, you will see a panel, and at the top of your screen, and the third button, there will be a button that is a screen share. It'll be immediately to the left of the gear that is the settings.
So it says share, right?
Yeah, it says share screen.
Okay. Share. Well, it says, no, this is not the right share. That's to share to the program. So I have options here.
So you want to, no. You want to hover.
Why don't we maybe, sorry, I'm in disembodied voice because I'm eating, but why don't we maybe put a link into the chat later? It might be better.
Let's do that. It'll be easier.
Yeah, and I'll just put a link to my Instagram site, which has other stuff too, but you can see the various dogs and pictures of challah and all kinds of things. Anyway, so we wandered everywhere we went. I took pictures of these dogs, and there I had a contact sheet of
Ben has the grid. It's upside down, Ben.
right. It was really hard to decide which one would make the best shirt.
They're so cute. Oh my God, so many dogs. Holy cow.
Well, that's, they were everywhere. And it was hard to, if I were better at Photoshop, I would have loved to take the background out. But it was also hard to get them to pose looking right at you. So this guy nominated himself.
Well, it was a huge surprise to get it. Even though John told me something from you was coming, I did not expect a custom-made dog shirt. This is the first, by the way, stray dog shirt.
Right. Yeah.
So thank you for doing it. And I am super grateful, and it's and kind of in love with the dog.
Yeah, well, I'm glad I picked this one. I mean, he nominated himself, and I'm really just happy he was able to work it out. And I have to find a link somewhere to the outfit that made them. They were quite helpful. I don't remember. But
super
anyway,
cool, Len. You're the best.
Okay.
This is so
It
sweet.
was lots of fun to work on it. Thanks. People were very protective of how to reach you. I almost sent it to Brookings, but John suggested I just send it to him.
You did it exactly right, and I appreciate the protectiveness. There have been a few security incidents, and I'm not looking for more. All of which is a fabulous way of saying that we are not allowed to have fun anymore, though we are allowed to have dog shirts. And by the way, I had a meeting the other day with a senior government official, and this caused a little bit of a crisis for me because my brand is wearing dog shirts, even in,
What did she say? What did they say?
So I decided I got to go with the dog shirt for the senior government official meeting. And the person began the meeting saying, "Oh my God, I don't know. I can only see the eyes. I don't know what that shirt is, but that's the greatest thing anyone's ever worn to a meeting." And we had a 5-minute conversation about dog shirts. And so I'm just telling you, Eve Goumand, I don't know if she's here. She's convinced that the new business attire is going to be lion shirt with a blazer. And I'm totally down with that. I think we're all gonna.
What if it just becomes a signal of humility, of not taking yourself seriously, being a serious person?
What more could we hope for?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly right. Okay, so
all of which brings us to the subject at hand. No, Colleen Casey, they are not nipply and weird. There is no way. Look, I'm not going into where my nipples are. There's no way that they're okay.
Yeah. No, it looks in fact, this shirt is really absolutely tremendous. I love it very much. I think it's a very sweet gift from Len. And I think that it's great.
Very touched by it, and thank you, Len. So
you're physically touched by the gift. Also, I just want to point out.
Yeah, it's literally touching me. So wait, I want to introduce today's subject. The other day, KK was texting me, and we were talking about some work, and she was saying that she wanted to ask me a bunch of questions about sextortion cases because of something she was working on.
I'll just tell you what I'm working on, which is that I'm teaching. So one of my mentors I don't know if I actually say he's a mentor. He's a former teacher of mine, a former professor of mine from Brown. His class was the graduate level studies class. I think it was called Thinking, that was in cognitive science and what was then cogneuro, and introduced me basically to a number of concepts that just kind of shook my world, and a number of studies that very much shook my world and have stayed with me for generations. Even as those studies and those methodologies become outdated, it shaped my ability to deal with dealing with those studies was my entryway into dealing with empirics and all these other things. So now I teach. I'm not teaching formally because I'm definitely not being paid, and this is definitely just on like my own time. Which question, like Daphne Keller was like, Kate, what are you doing? You do too much. Why would you agree to sign up for a 2-hour like teach a 2-hour graduate study seminar on cognitive neuroscience at Brown for no money or credit? And I was like, it's fun. It's really fun. But like, I've been doing this, and the seminar is with it's actually with 2 really precocious undergrads who are very charming and wonderful. And they prep a bunch of studies, and they like tell them to myself and Steve Sloman, who's been on the show and who I reconnected with through the show in part. And the entire conceit is that they've picked out a number of various elements of cognitive science and a number of various strains of cognitive science research that they think relates back to deepfakes and the implications for deepfakes, because they're compiling a report for something. I have no idea. My interest in this is not in the publication credit. It's not in the teaching credits. It is like literally me having fun on a Friday afternoon for an hour and a half with this group. But we got like, what's happened repeatedly is we go through these very esoteric kind of tangentially like related cases, and there is inevitably this question of like, is this about synthetic media? Like, is this about the ability to actually make Vladimir Putin appear like he's saying this thing, or to make Emma Watson appear like she's in a pornography, also relevant because Emma Watson went to Brown. So like, but like appear like she's in this pornography movie. What are like the various implications of deepfakes vis-a-vis like, how do we separate them out from like an autocratic government having a studio of LA proportions set up in like their homeland and being able to just produce media videos that are real but fake, versus the new threat of deepfakes. And of course we read Bobby Chesney and Danielle Citron's like deepfakes piece, which is canonical, although like we're going to revisit it now. But one of the things that came up halfway through the semester was, okay, like we have been really focusing on, I think for various reasons, because of Ukraine and Russia and all the things, of like this autocratic kind of like, we've really been kind of over rotating, I think, in this autocratic way. And on a bunch of the stuff that came up recently, and I think it was also matched with me reading on my own about a bunch of sextortion cases, I was just like, this threat is going to be a threat in a way that is much more common and base than we think about it. It's not going to be this precious singularity threat, because if there is some type of singularity threat, it's going to be that'll be a threat all on its own. The threat is going to be in convincing 14-year-old girls that there is pornography that someone has taken of them in some, or like photos that someone has taken of them, that convince them as an entry gateway kind of into like providing other types of photos. Sorry, that's Nina. They're providing other types of photos to like kind of like doing this type of thing. And so, and the undergrads were with me. And I would say Steve was like a little reluctant. And I was like, no, I mean, I'm not saying he was totally reluctant. He was just kind of like, I think like a lot of people, he's like, oh, well, what's the threat of sextortion? Like versus the threat of, and of course, like, I kind of think instantly he was like, oh, wow, as like an educator in this modern environment, like I live constantly in fear that I'm going to be accused of something, or like there's going to be something leveled at me. What if that was plausible? Or there was some type of like type of thing that like catastrophically, even if it was just an initial matter released, even if I came back from it, would I ever come back from it? And he kind of like boomeranged really fast. And his boomerang was so fast that it all is to say that it made me come back to you to be like, we should revisit this. I haven't had the time and space to be thinking about this in this capacity. But you're an expert in sextortion and what is also called
although a dated one. I mean,
what?
I should caveat this, that, you know, the work that I did on Sextortion was 4 or 5 years ago, and the landscape has changed a bit since then. But yeah, so you said you wanted to chat about it, and I said let's do it on the show.
I kind of wanted to interview you about it, and we thought this would be, and we like initially were like, well, let's get a guest for today because it's a weird day, and like we'll try to put, but then like when the guest fell through, I was like, oh well, weren't we already going to talk about this, and so this is perfect. So the first thing is like, can you explain sextortion / sexploitation and like the procedural elements that go into it from a perspective of like a person who is being extorted, and the position of kind of like how, I guess I would love it if you could kind of put a valence on it for both sides of like what the person who is perpetrating this crime is doing.
Yeah, so let's start away from deep fakes, because I think people like to start with deep fakes.
No, I 100% think like let's leave deep fakes out of them. Let's start with about
just sort of
good old fashioned
sextortion. So this is as old as, I don't know, people have been having sex and extorting each other over it. Famous Alexander Hamilton scandal, right, was a sextortion scandal. When we say sextortion today, we do not mean, I think most people do not mean traditional good old fashioned sexual extortion.
Well, like let's just call it, let's just call the good old fashioned stuff blackmail.
Well, so I want to cut the onion a little bit finer than that. Two people have sex and one of them blackmails the other over it. I don't care if it's by email or by, Polaroid photos or whatever. That's as old as the day is long, right? Here is what is new and why people like me got interested in sextortion. Because it is possible to scale sexual extortion online in a way that it was never possible. That sort of sexual extortion you always had to do in a very bespoke fashion, right? You get somebody to do something that compromises them, you have images of it somehow, you have evidence of it, you blackmail them. The thing that you can do online is essentially compel people to produce pornography in an ongoing way. And I got interested in this because it's actually a very weird story how I got interested in this. I was writing a book on the future of violence, which was eventually called The Future of Violence, with my friend Gabby Bloom. And we were thinking about miniaturization and drones and remote attack in warfare and the ability to kill somebody from half a world away, right? And we were thinking, okay, well, that technology is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and it's disseminating really fast. And wow, how long will it be before I can kill somebody who's halfway around the world, right? And that was a relatively common question that people were asking 5-7 years ago. And so Gabby and I kind of developed a whole theory of miniaturization and remoteness and violence. And I don't want to go into that theory, but we should
do that again. We should talk about that though. I've never heard of that miniature. I mean, I'm not familiar with this area, but we should also that's worth talking about. But yes, but go ahead.
So that's a whole other conversation. But eventually I was sitting at my computer and I was thinking to myself, if my theory is right, this theory that Gabby and I had developed, other elemental forms of attack, not just killing people, should be possible remotely, like theft. And I thought, well, yeah, I get 100 emails a day from Nigerian princes who want to give me, $10 billion in gold, right? So I was like, okay, check the theft, right? We know. And then I said, okay, what's the other really elemental human on human attack, and it's sexual violence. And so I was like, all right, if my theory is right, people should be raping each other remotely. And so I just Googled online rape. And an article came up about one of the most terrifying cases I had ever heard of to that day. And it involved a hacker in California who was sextorting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women and young girls by infecting their computers with malware, turning their webcams against them. You get a single nude photo of one of them changing, and then you use that photo to extort the production of more pornography by her. And the amazing thing about this, other than the incredible brutality of the case, the defendant, by the way, who I believe is now free, I'm not sure, have to check on that, is named Luis Mijangos. I learned the word sextortion. And so then I started Googling the word sextortion, and it turns out.
By the way, Luis Mijangos in 2011 was 32, an illegal alien from Mexico, and he had a 6-year prison sentence.
Yes. And by the way, prosecutors were lucky to get that, probably 250 victims.
Yes, there were probably 250 victims whose lives he upturned and distorted and construed and completely made more difficult in a bunch of different ways. And by the way, I just want to say I'm avoiding the word ruined because I just read in the last day a really great piece by Maybelle Romero, who herself was a victim of childhood sexual abuse and who watched as a prosecutor later in life, judges refer to sexual victims as ruined and broken. And she hated this very much and felt like it was incredibly disempowering for her. And so I'm I actually almost said ruined right now. I was oh, you ruined it. And now I'm not going to say that anymore. I'm consciously yeah.
Impacts are highly, highly variable.
Yeah.
But when we published our Brookings Sextortion report, we were contacted by victims in faraway places. I don't want to name countries. I don't want to get close to identifying people who were, terrified of their attackers to this day. Mijangos, it turns out, was a chump. The highest. The ones who do the most in victimization have literally thousands of victims. Much of this is directed at the adult victims, at least on sextortion for porn, are almost exclusively women. There are male victims of sextortion for money. It's quite common, actually. And that's a bit of a different thing. There is a huge problem of sextortion directed at teenage gay kids who may be exploring coming out. And this is a real problem. A lot of suicides result from sextortion. It is, and so we did, I guess 4 or 5 years ago, I can't remember what year it was, we did, I think, the first major study of sextortion cases.
I found it in prepping for today, but yeah.
We identified 80 cases of it around the country, most of them federal. The victims we were able to positively identify, and we didn't name anybody, but we were able to identify 1,300 victims in 80 cases. So that, just as Uber scales taxi driving, the sextortionists, the online sextortionists, have scaled sexual violence in a way that we've never seen before outside of wartime rape. And so I think it's a very significant, under-discussed, it tends to get lost under rubric of revenge porn. I think it's a more serious problem than revenge porn. It's a more widespread problem.
It drips
And
over into other areas like national
yes,
security or intelligence or other types of things. But hold on one second. I'm gonna explain one thing, Ben, which is that like I think that some people are not quite fully understanding how something like sextortion works, and I want to just unfortunately spell it out. So, and this is kind of like really how it was made real for me was like when I was researching deepfakes in the last couple of weeks, I came across this one and I just dropped it into the chat, this Daily Mail story about a Cambridge graduate who is one of Britain's worst pedophiles. And he did something called hurtcore, which is essentially like it is like pornography, but extreme degradation. And it's often like inflicted or like, I mean, it's like actually like people who are true pedophiles. This is like one of the more bizarre things that I've read, who believe that they are who have justified in their mind the abuse of children because they love children so much that they are like raping them because they love them, think that hurtcore is actually like a terrible abomination on society. So like literally if you think of like pedophiles, like in like NAMBLA, like that type of thing, like then like the North American Boy Love Association, and then you think of like below that, these people, like this is like the hurtcore people. And of these, so basically what it basically said was that there's a guy from Cambridge, like this dorky paleontology guy who for years had used Tor and a number of other like kind of sites to basically disguise his identity, to go on to the version of Craigslist in the UK to find people advertising, teenage girls advertising for babysitting, say that he was a middle-aged or elderly woman that did some type of figure drawing, get the individual to offer some obscene amount of money, $500, $800. There was some there's really some problem with the payment coming through or something, but just send me the pictures of your naked back, or like a tasteful photo of you in black and white topless or something like that. And they're like, how bad could this be? This is going to be £800 or $800. And this is so great. And this 14-year-old girl does this. And here's what happens. They do this and the person instantly changes. It's like Jekyll and Hyde. And the person is, of course, not an elderly woman, but like in this case, this like PhD graduate from Cambridge that is seeking to kind of extort people and is doing this in this way that like basically like comes at them. And at this point, they have the real name of the individual that they are victimizing. And they are going to basically they have already at this point sussed out all of their friends. So what they do is they then come back at the person the second after they sent this vulnerable picture and they say, I know every single person that you're friends with. Here are their names. Here's who you're good friends with based on all of your social media. I've figured it out. And here's all the ways that they follow me. Here's some screenshots. They follow me. They followed me back. I have relationships with them. They're going here's your mom. Here's your dad. Here's your aunt and uncle. Here's your priest. And they're all going to get this photo if you don't take a photo of yourself licking a toilet seat.
I mean, a lot of it is
number of doing X number of
basic,
yeah,
it starts off as masturbation videos.
It's actually
becomes
probably the
more
worst.
degrading over time.
Yeah, it's absolutely, but sorry, I'm only spelling this out because people were like, I don't understand what sextortion is in the chat.
Actually,
so I'm like, okay, this is what we're talking about. 4
distinct modalities of sextortion. So Kate just described one, which is by far the most common. It's catfishing, right? It's, you con somebody over time, you develop a relationship with them, you con them over time into sending you a nude or some kind of, by the way, in a lot of the Muslim world, the initial photo isn't even a nude. It's just, the hijab a little bit back in a revealing way, and that can get somebody killed in an honor killing. And there was a very good BBC account of the way sextortion works. It's mostly for money, actually, in the UK, in Muslim communities. And so, we think of it as like people sexting each other. It's not even necessarily sexting, although it often is. And then you leverage that for increasingly degrading. It's really the best way to think about it.
But then this other person often flips around into the weird, completely protected through encryption types of community they're in. Like sometimes their motivation is currency in their communities of pedophiles and hardcore people. And sometimes it's money. Sometimes they're selling the actual content for like tens of thousands of dollars.
So there's definitely an overlap with the child porn community, but this is also there's also just highly individualized collectors who are basically, enjoying having people, sometimes adults, sometimes children, in kind of protracted periods of sexual slavery. So that's one modality. Second modality, which people don't talk about a lot, but which actually accounts for a fair number of the cases, is just individual abuse, like intimate abuse. It becomes a part of a stalking of one individual by another, and the person pretends to be somebody else and ends up in a sextortion. There was a horrible father-daughter case of this in New York. There have been a number of these cases. Some of them involve hands-on abuse as well. Some of them don't. These cases are particularly vile. The third, which is also common, is so one way to get somebody to send you a nude is by conning them into doing it, a la catfishing. Another way is to steal their passwords. And a lot of people take sexy pictures of themselves. And if you can guess their passwords, and most people, don't do the two-step authentication thing, don't have strong passwords. There was a horrible case out of California that basically one guy guessed the passwords of basically a whole community of girls he had gone to high school with. This was when they were all in college. And a remarkable number of them had, to one degree or another, revealing pictures, which he then used to extort them. There are a lot of those cases. And then the final most common, least common, but most sort of emblematic of the cases involves actual hacking. That, right, you've most of the sextortionists are not master hackers of the Luis Mijangos variety. They're not writing malware. It's easier actually to get people by conning them and catfishing than it is to. But there are a few who've done a lot, and they've gotten a fair bit of attention. And if you can, there's a whole culture on YouTube, which I tried to get YouTube to crack down on, and of like webcam turning videos. A lot of it is directed at young kids masturbating, and you get a video from somebody's webcam while they're interacting with porn, a 13-year-old or something, and then you break in on the screen and say, "Ha, I've got you now," and for people think this is wildly funny, and there's a whole category of, it even has a name, I forget what it is. And so these are the main modalities. The number of victims is immense, and that's the critical point that I think people don't understand. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people have been victimized this way, without and nobody counts it in the crime victimization statistics for a lot of reasons we can go into if you want.
Yeah, so I do want, but I also kind of want to tie it quickly back to deepfakes before we kind of go into like why people do or do not engage with this, because I think that it's not immediately clear to people why deepfakes would present a problem in this scenario. But now that we've kind of gone over the rudimentary procedure of a perpetrator trying to extort these types of things for money, for clout, for personal gain, for sick destruction, whatever it is. Why do deepfakes present a problem here when it seems like there has been something like this, as you said, that has gone on forever, and that the internet has already added its own kind of version of this just with traditional cameras and real media that is like extorted out of people in a terrible way?
Yeah, so I mean, people's concerns about deepfakes tend to be expressed as like Vladimir Putin creates a deep fake of Volodymyr Zelensky. There's what some people have called a deep fake, a famous one. It's actually a very shallow fake of Nancy Pelosi.
The slurred speech one, the one where it seemed like she was drunk. Yeah.
Right. And I accept that those are a real problem. And as the technology gets better, those will become an increasingly big problem. But I'm much more concerned about an intermediate problem, which is, so if you took the slurred speech video and you did that to a 14-year-old girl and superimposed, and created a video of her having sex in a porn video.
Well, what if you even but that she would be able to maybe but what if it was something more mundane and what if it was her being drunk?
Right.
And
so,
she's super conservative.
So I'm like, let's just take very basic interactions. And let's talk about the difference between the 14-year-old girl and Volodymyr Zelensky. And it's also the 14-year-old boy, right? So teenagers have a particularly refined sense of shame. They are, it's a very, very shame-based age. Secondly, they are generally not, and I don't say this with any criticism of Volodymyr Zelensky, they're generally not egomaniacs, whereas politicians generally are, right? And you have a certain amount of tolerance for, your face wobbling the way it's not supposed to when you're Volodymyr Zelensky that you may not if you're your average, teenage girl or teenage boy. The third thing is you have professional teams that are supposed to help you with that and news media that care and that go out and say, hey, this is obviously fake. And if you're Nancy Pelosi, you can ride that through. Now, is that going to last as the technology develops? Maybe not. But these people are dramatically better positioned to deal with this problem than the average teenager is. And the average teenager is really in a tough situation. Video is very powerful. And by the way,
and also if they're advertising in some way and they're found through some type of way that already signals that they're looking for work or looking for jobs as a teenager, it kind of signals a financial vulnerability.
They're vulnerable in all kinds of ways. And by the way, one of them is that they don't have fully developed prefrontal cortexes, and they
that help with risk assessment. Yeah.
They don't assess risk reasonably. And so it's a particularly vulnerable age group. It's a particularly shame-oriented age. And by the way, it's also one where that we know is targeted with with sextortion, other forms of sexual exploitation online. Finally, and this is the other thing, which is just a truism about technology and the internet, everything you worry is going to happen to heads of state is already happening to teenage girls. That's just an iron law of the internet. Technology always, really, really develops the ability to do all kinds of things in video, develops in the porn industry by way of exploiting people. And there's just no reason to think that this won't be like that. Yes, there are, for every InfoSec person who's working to protect these people, there is a phalanx of people looking to exploit them. And some of them are totally legitimate businessmen. And so, and businesswomen. I mean, it's the cosmetics industry. It's there's huge money behind the idea of manipulating video to exploit teenagers, particularly teenage girls, but not exclusively. And so I think when you think about a technology like deepfakes, we have this real instinct to think about it in terms of the implications for geopolitics. I'm immediately concerned about the implications for high school.
Yeah, we were talking about this, I think. I can't remember if it was in the green room or now, but like we were it was now. Sorry, I've been like having this conversation a few times today. But I was just kind of like, I've said recently, like, there's like the wag the dog. There's like, wag the dog was the one, right? Where they create a whole studio in a war right around like this idea. Like, yeah, you could always have done that. That's not deep fakes. That's actually just theater. And there's not, at the end of the day, the outcome is not hugely different. What you can do is like get someone who looks and talks exactly like Nancy Pelosi or exactly like Barack Obama. And like, that is the difference. Or like Zelensky or whoever it's going to be. And so I just really think that this is like the key thing. And like that type of intervention is in geopolitics is, it's not to be like fucked with. It's definitely really bad, especially around elections and things like that, especially around like the time frame in which people are voting. But I will say that like, I agree with you. It's kind of like a shit rolls downhill phenomenon, which is like, you're just going to have it piled up for young girls and really vulnerable, like kids coming out or trans people or people of color. And this is just like, this is the story of the internet in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And don't ignore, teenage boys in this who are, there is nothing goofier than a 14-year-old boy. And, they're vulnerable creatures too, actually. There's another really important reason to focus on the local effects of deepfakes rather than the global effects, which is that the quality of them they don't need to be nearly as deep to be effective. So ask yourself this: and I'm making this personal on purpose, if I make a deepfake video of you that's pretty bad, giving a speech that you never gave and saying, I'm pro-Russia and they invaded you, it was righteous for them to denazify Ukraine, you'd be like, you're an asshole. I never said anything like that. You wouldn't feel a lot of shame about that. But if I made a video of you
looking like I was doing something untoward in a public bathroom that is familiar to me in some way, or that I use all the time,
that video would not have to be very good.
Yeah.
And you might react the same way, just saying, you're an asshole, I would never do that. That's not real. But you would feel differently about it because it involves intimacy in a way that, and one of the lessons of the sextortion cases to me is that people, and this is not, it's extreme in the case of children, but it's true of adults too. People will do unbelievably awful things in order to prevent one picture of them with a frontal nudity picture from getting out. And you say, well, you're producing material that's so much worse than the material you're afraid. But the fear of exposure is an incredibly powerful driver. And I don't think that's true in the video doesn't even have to be very good to trigger that. Whereas to create an international incident with a fake video, you actually have to do it pretty well.
This was like basically what I was saying. Like, yeah, I think that that's right. I think that that's very, very, very right. And I think that like the other thing that we're kind of discounting is like the amount in which any of us have ever like said something we shouldn't have said, drunk, and woken up the next day thinking that everyone else is waking up thinking about what we said, like drunk, or like, the stupid thing that we did, instead of thinking about the stupid things that they did. Like no one is ever thinking about you as much as you are. And so this is something that this in particular for like the kind of the completely self-oriented, egomaniacal, like ego kind of like egocentric world of a teenager, like totally manipulates, which is like, they know all the intentionality that went into that photo, all of the things that made them do it, and all of the things that they were feeling as a budding person and a sexual person, and like everything, and all the trust and intimacy that went into it. And none of that is coming out. And all of that is being projected by them into this thing. And the perpetrators counting on it. They're counting on them doing that, like kind of, yeah.
And look, the perpetrators don't get caught quickly. This is, one of the things, almost all sexual violence is recidivist. And so the question when you're dealing with people who are engaged in sexual violence is, how quickly do you catch them, right? And one of the things that's striking to me about the sextortionists is how many victims they rack up before we tend to catch them. And that has everything to do with the shame of the victims.
Completely. Matteo. Hi, sorry. Welcome to the very heavy conversation. I do think
cheerful
it's a super
subject.
important conversation. I hope that like people, it's educational, and like I think this is a constructive way to deal with a really complex and terrible topic. But go ahead, Matteo. You had a great question.
Oh yeah, my question was, what's the maximal remedy for this? And by that I mean, what's the policy option that has the biggest effect on this problem, but is the equivalent of saying ban all guns, something that just won't happen. I'm having trouble imagining something like this for this problem, because you can't really unring the technology bell for people.
Yeah, so there is no simple solution to this problem. This problem is inherent in the ability of people to direct message each other by 100 different means and send each other pictures by those means and videos by those means. If you can do that, you're going to have this problem. A lot of people in the Justice Department blame encryption. There is an element of truth to that, which is that encryption actually makes the investigation of a lot of these cases more difficult. It is not true that these cases happen on encrypted platforms. They happen on unencrypted platforms. If you put a porn studio in the hands of every person, man, woman, and child in the United States, and you give them the ability to communicate directly with one another, bad things are going to happen. And there are a lot of great things are going to happen too. And I'm not against that, but so I don't think there is a magic bullet solution to this. And I do think the most important thing you can do is to train children that they need to stop throwing good money after bad in these situations. People dig themselves into holes. People make mistakes. People send a first bad picture. We need to train kids in a kind of no questions asked. We will never shame you for whatever picture you might have took of yourself and sent to somebody. We just want to help and make it stop. And if you can train the victim population to that, and look, that's been really hard to do in the physical sexual violence world because a lot of people don't actually mean it. Like it's the only thing that works is when some victim finds a Carrie Goldberg, Kate's friend, and my friend, who represents people in these cases and has a kind of
and
advocate.
Normalizes and tells them there's other people like them, and this
Right.
is like something they deal with, and stop being ashamed, and like that's all important.
And it's got to be like schools have to be trained about this, police departments. The entity that's really good, by the way, is the federal government. The FBI and Homeland Security investigations have done really, really great investigative work. A lot of state law enforcement is a disaster on this. A lot of local police departments, it's really, really bad. And some of them don't have the local tools. There was a case that I wrote about in Rhode Island of somebody he was a wrestling coach, and he had used the network of wrestling teams. He had basically preyed upon dozens of 14-year-old boys all over the state of Rhode Island. And he got less than a year in prison under Rhode Island state law. He would have gotten 30, 40 years in federal prison. So there's a real patchwork of law, and there's a lot of people who need a lot of education about how to handle it and how not to dismiss cases where kids are under stress and adults, particularly adults above sort of the age of 35, have an instinct to respond to them. Well, why do you send that guy a fucking picture of your breasts, right? And like there's a real learning process that people need to go through about how to and how not to respond to these cases when they materialize.
So we have to go to Richard's question. Richard, you're unmuted, so feel free to pitch in as soon as I finish. But I was just going to say that this is a great point, and Deirdre brought it up in the chat. Like the other thing that I was reading about was like that they specifically, like I think that a lot of these perpetrators specifically target kids that they know have really terrible relationships at home or with their parents, like that they know there's not going to be an open outlet where they can like say something like this, that they are going to get yelled at. And like I just really feel like people are bad at empathizing back to them that was 13 years old. I say empathizing by being like understanding who they were at 13 and realizing that they were like still a good person at 13 but did crazy things at 13
and realizing that the crazy things that they did when they were 13 would have been a shitload crazier if they'd had a smartphone.
Yeah, I mean, right? I think that's exactly right. So yeah, Richard.
Ben, you've answered some of my questions already, but I know we've talked on the show some about the mental health issues, serious mental health issues that people who are, for example, involved with content moderation or even enforcement, what they face. And I'm just wondering if are these the sorts of mental health concerns for people who are enforcing? Is this a huge obstacle? Is this a problem? Is it discouraging people from doing this kind of work and driving the people who are out of it? Or,
we have an
impossible situation?
It's a really important question. And I want to say that, look, the cases that I've studied, I cannot sit here and express to you how appalling they are. And here's the thing. These are after they're scrubbed, right? So this is the FBI identifying only the material that the court really needs to see, the prosecutors trying to write up an account of it in very clinical terms. You're only seeing a very small amount of the material. The process, so the prosecutors have it rough on this. The ones who really have it rough is the investigators. Look, I know people who've worked some of these cases who it just crushed them. And like, really took an immense emotional toll on them. I also know people, and this is a kind of interesting effect of, these grizzled investigators who look like central casting FBI people who sound like, feminists. They like it's really like opened people's eyes to, and they become kind of missionary about some of.
Well, it's hard to be like you wore a short skirt and like, like it's like so clear how like the line between like how this line gets blurred and like what a stupid and fucked up line it was to begin with.
Yeah, there's a group of them who, and it's a weird, the people who care about this, it's like a weird community of like CSIPs prosecutors, computer crimes prosecutors, child sexual exploitation investigators, feminists, and some Christian conservatives. Those are the groups that are like crusading about this stuff. And they're in this weird coalition. It's kind of like they don't have a lot in common. But I do think there's a kind of missionary driven quality to some of the people who've worked this stuff, because the cases are just so horrible that and I like, even just like, I don't want to give you the headline, even the headlines are just like nauseating. And I think once you've worked a few of these cases, there's some group who's like, I can never do that again. Put me on, bank fraud, put me on. But there's also groups who were like, don't ever want to work on anything else because there are these kids and adults that are being really fucked up. You're muted.
We have to wrap, but Ev can't come on screen. Dr. Doom had a very similar question I was going to have him on, and there was no disrespect for him, but I actually think this is like, I liked Ev's formulation of it, and I think it's important to have, like, as we talk about this, we've like heard from a bunch of men, and there's no, like, I don't really actually think that this is dispositive, but I just think it's useful to have another person's voice. And Ev asks, as deepfakes become more prevalent, could teenagers' nudes become less shameful? Because there's always the possibility it's not real. And I think that this is like a very, well, I'm going to like let you answer, but I'm just going to say like right off the bat really quickly that I think that this is like a fault, like probably not. Like, yes.
I think the shame teenagers feel about nudity and is probably not easily overcomable. I would love to be wrong about that. And, I do think like, there's
always education and sophistication that come with new technologies. There's always a gap, and it does like catch up. But I do think that there's like probably, I agree with you.
I think it's, I'm doubtful. I think the thing that we need to teach the 14-year-old is, or the 17-year-old, or the 24-year-old, is the moment you realize this is happening, tell somebody.
Yeah.
There are support networks for it. There are There is law enforcement that cares, though sometimes you have to push them. There are people who will help you. I think there's just no substitute for and by the way, the perpetrators have to believe, right now they believe that like 1 in 1,000 people is going to say something.
Yes.
They need to believe that 1 in 3 people are going to say something.
Oh, yeah.
It needs to be like, they need to believe the ratio is at a level that they are at risk.
Yep. I think that that's exactly right. And I think that Carrie Goldberg would say the same thing, which is just kind of like, and I also think that this is something that slowly, and I hate to say this because I don't actually think this is an answer to the question, but I do think it cleans up so much of the mess in the majority and then still leaves a lot of unanswered solutions in the margins, which is just kind of the idea that there are still going to be solutions to these problems that are solved by like state police, local police finally start to take online stalking, sextortion, like intimate partner violence, like all of these things seriously. But like, I don't know. We also know that like they didn't take those things seriously when they were just in meat space and had nothing to do with cyberspace. So like there's also kind of something to be said for that. And so like maybe the greater effect will be that like once these things become both like kind of in the federal scale and like kind of get the visibility that the internet provides through this type of stuff, like to some of this that will cause people to take a lot of these kind of domestic violence or like sextortion cases more seriously. I certainly hope so, but I'm not holding my breath. And I think in the meantime, there has to be a lot of activism and awareness around these issues. So
I think that's right. And, you know, and just, I think every time, I think the big answer to Kate's question that prompted this conversation is every time you see a deep fake discussion about the potential for
every time you
harm.
see a new technology, a profound new technology, ask
Right,
how it's going to impact women.
Like what this is going to do in high school.
Yep.
Just like it's not just women, it's you know, but it's like what you think is going to happen between Ukraine and Russia, not bomb wise, but geopolitics is already happening in your high school down the street.
Great. We're going to leave it there. We'll be back on March 21st. And I do not think that Scott and I have a guest yet, but we'll work on it. And until then, Ben?
We don't have fun anymore. We do have the first stray dog shirt, and we should all, tell the young people in our lives to have better passwords.
And be careful out there, and to not be ashamed if they aren't careful out there and they make bad choices in the short term, that they don't have to be sucked into the long term. Bye, guys.